Good morning to all. Respected speaker of the day, Dr. Anshuman Behera, my dear colleagues and my dear students. Uh, Very happy that we are all through this semester, we are able to organize lectures where we have experts in different fields who are coming and talking to our students, giving their ideas with regard to varied topics. And I am sure that enables our students to analyze these political issues in a better way. So for today, I am very happy to give a very brief introduction of the topic of the day, from Mao to Maoism, the Indian path. For the benefit of students, I think this will give them an idea of the entire talk. So, with regard to the topic, Maoism is a form of communism developed by Mao Zedong, who ruled the People's Republic of China from 1949 to 1976. Mao believed that the peasants could overthrow the capitalists and create a socialist society. His emphasis on the importance of taking the peasant as the main force of the revolution distinguished Maoism from the urban working class centered revolution of the Marxist-Leninist. Mao also emphasized on a continuous revolution, which he believed was important to renew the system and to check corruption. He was also a staunch believer of mass mobilization, voluntarism, and ruthless determination on the part of the people with regard to the violence, with regard to any revolution that had to happen. And he also did not deny the fact that, a revolution could become violent. And he even called it a people's war. So, as an ideology, we see that these ideas were, important with regard to those times. And in India, what we see is that the Naxalites in India are considered the far left communists supporting Maoism, and their origin can be traced to the split of the CPI-M, which followed the Naxalbari peasant uprising, which started actually in West Bengal, and later on it spread to certain the southern and eastern states of the country. So here we see that they are people who reject parliamentary democracy, and they also aim to bring about a revolution in an armed way, and they indulge sometimes in extreme violence, and they try to get the support of the marginalized people, especially in the rural areas, claiming to actually fight for their rights, for the rights of the poor. And what we see is that they follow the strategy of Mao Zedong, which is the People's War, and it was a protracted People's War, which meant it was to be a war which would happen for a long period, right? So it was not something which would end after a particular goal was attained. As we have seen, these Naxalites, they target politicians, police officials, and there is always violent clash between them and the state security forces, the paramilitary groups, and the army personnel, and all that. And we also see that we hear about bomb blasts and derailing, trains and things like that, which all gets associated with the techniques actually used by these Naxalites who claim to believe in the ideology, and they try to implement it with regard to, because they want to overthrow, the government, or they are not ready to accept, whatever these democratic governments are actually doing. So by 2007 in India, we see that almost half of the Indian states, uh, they were affected by this problem, and that area in which these people were very dominant, that was called the Red Corridor. And at that time, the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said that this about this problem. He said that the Naxalites, he called the Naxalites the single biggest internal security challenge ever faced by our country. This problem was addressed in that way by our then Prime Minister. And with regard to the counter-insurgency strategies, uh, what we see is that considerably there is a reduction with regard to cases, but we can understand the counter-insurgency strategy of the government from two perspectives, where number one, it is more of an opponent-centric kind of an approach where they try to contain their activities, and they, try to have a law and order approach where they tighten up the security and they deploy more forces and things like that, so that their activities can be curtailed. That is on one hand. And on the other side, what we see is that the government also tries to approach the entire issue from a population, oriented approach, where they try to, bring about certain developmental measures and welfare measures for the population, which give a support to these Naxals because they are poor or they are downtrodden, and there is need for a development in their area, so that they do not get the support of this population. So this kind of an approach is also seen with the government. And in the present scenario, what we see is that there are a lot of developments happening. And today we even talk about these Naxalites are supposed to be more concentrated in remote villages and tribal areas and all that, where they mobilize the population. But we also talk about topics like urban Naxals, and we hear that they get support of the elite when it comes to their ideology. So these are certain things which our speaker can tell us more about. And also with regard to the present pandemic, we see that already there are people who are against the government, and they're not ready to accept any decision of the government. So when it comes to handling the pandemic also, it is a situation where uh, probably they question the way in which the government is about, because already there are economic problems, and many people suffering due to COVID-19. So in the light of all of this, we come to understand that this is a very important issue with regard to the security of the country, because even if it is curtailed or certain positive aspects or actions are taken, we still have the problem which is a threat to our security. So we are very happy that we have our speaker today to brief us more on more to Maoism, the Indian path. I'm sure that we'll be enlightened more on the topic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. I now invite our speaker, Dr. Anshuman Behera, to deliver the lecture. Sir, can you please unmute yourself, sir?
Yeah. Now I'm audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, let's start. Let me see my presentation. Okay. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you, Dr. Sudha, for that wonderful briefing on Maoism. First of all, this is an emotional moment because I consider myself, though I am very much into the conflict and the peace studies right now, but I always consider myself as a student of political science. This cannot be better or a more wonderful kind of platform to speak other than the Association of Political Science. It's like coming home. Okay, wonderful. Okay, this is a lovely feeling to speak to fellow political science students and the professors around. I would also like to thank Dr. Freddy for kindly inviting me, Professor Christopher, and the entire fraternity of Madras Christian College for having me and to ask me to speak on Maoism. I have titled this From Mao to Maoism, the Indian Path, for the simple reason that there is a lot of these prejudices around understanding the Maoist problem in India. The prejudices being, okay, if I can categorize in two broad areas. One is that, as Dr. Sudha was mentioning, that this is always seen as a security problem. It's a security problem to the extent that they are seen a threat to the Indian state, Indian state and the government, okay, as they are against the parliamentary form of governance and all that. That's a very dominant kind of narrative that we all tend to believe, that the Maoists are a security threat to the state of India. And the second dominant kind of understanding or the narrative around which the Maoist movement has been understood so far is about the Maoists are genuinely representing the voices of the people, especially the marginalized and the underprivileged ones. So there are elements of truth in both the narratives, but they do not present the entire truth and the reality around the Maoist movement in India. So what I intend to do in next 30-40 minutes, that I step away from these two narratives and I try to present before you how this Maoism in India or the Maoist movement in India has actually evolved, and what kind of philosophical background they actually come from. Do they completely subscribe the Marxist-Leninist and the Maoist theories on the revolution? Or in last 70, 50 odd years of existence in India, what kind of philosophical contribution they sort of contribute to the theories of revolution? I hope that as students of political science will get into these larger questions than dealing with these prejudices about the security threat, about the representation and all those things, right? So so I start with, this is the okay, let me get into the slide. So, okay. Oh. Not able to change the slide. Just give me a moment.
Shruti, you have to change the slides, Shruti.
So I'm not handling the slides.
Okay, now you can change the slide, the changing.
Yeah, it is just, yeah.
Yes, so we can see
the
change.
slide has come.
Okay, the structure of the presentation has come.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So okay, that's fine. I'm sorry, this is my little ignorance about how to deal with this situation. Okay, so I start with a small theoretical debate on Marxist-Leninist and Maoist line. From there, I go to the Maoist movement. That is what I call the Annihilation Phase. Many people very popularly call it like the Charu Mazumdar phase of 1967 to 1972. Then I highlight the factionalism that has been a wonderful, or the most critical kind of feature of the communist movement in India. So the Maoist movement also, we have witnessed sort of factionalism. Then as the political situation in this country was changing, especially during the emergency, what kind of things it has gone through, the Maoist movement has gone through, especially during the emergency of the Maoist movement. Then I get into the formation of the CPI-Maoist, the Communist Party of India Maoist, that the post 2004 movement, and then I gave my conclusive remarks. And now this is when Dr. Tredi actually requested me, and he was more interested on knowing about certain issues about caste and the social structure and how this has a kind of interactions with the Maoist and the Marxist thing in India. So I will not deal with much of Marxism today, because that demands a complete separate session. We can always deal with that and discuss and debate on that. But today I'll focus on most on the Maoist debate and how it has come from the Marxist-Leninist tradition and departed from there. Okay, so the question when I'm dealing with the Marxist-Leninist and Maoist debate, the most important question that comes to our mind, that whether Maoism is a continuation of the Marxist-Leninist kind of tradition, or it is something more than that. You know, so if I have to find out the departure here, that I would actually highlight two important things. One is about the Mao's emphasis on something called the contradictions. Okay, and the second is about the subjective factors in understanding the class. Where as students of political science, if you remember, the class, when the whole aspect of class or the issue of class comes, the Marxist-Leninist tradition is very, very comfortable explaining it as the class between the economic factor becomes a determinant of understanding a class. But when Mao's understanding of class is not only it's about the economy alone, it is also ideological and political. Okay, but what is interesting is it doesn't really reject the Marxist standpoint on class, but he aids to this ideological and political thing. But what is important here is that he completely departs from Marx on the relationship between the contradictions. Let me also highlight very briefly, what is contradiction. If I derive from dialectical materialism of Marx, it says that contradictions are necessarily the opposition of social forces. And then it becomes, the economy becomes the important determinant in explaining the class and explaining the contradictions. So, but here the Mao actually departs, saying that capitalism itself is internally contradictory in nature, because different social classes have conflicting collective goals. Okay, and because he finds there are actually classes within a particular class. Okay, so the Marxist-Leninist demand in terms of eliminating one class, that is the bourgeoisie, and establishing the proletariat. Okay, dictatorship of the proletariat, that is the end objective of the revolution, doesn't hold much ground in Maoist kind of understanding. He goes little one step further and explains that these contradictions within capitalism, they stem from the social structure. This is where you see revolution from the Marxist-Leninist point of view, from an economic kind of thing. It comes to the primacy of social becomes very, very evident in Mao's understanding. These contradictions stem from the social structure of the society and inherently lead to class conflict. Here, the class is not limited only to the economic arena. Okay, from there, the class conflict leads to the economic crisis, and eventually it leads to revolution. Okay, so this is very, very important to actually deal with. That is where once we understand this, it becomes easier to understand the Maoist movement in India. So that is where you see that one finds the contradictions within contradictions. Okay, so when the class struggle is not an end thing, once you eliminate a particular class and that's the final objective of the thing, but it's a continuous process in a communist society. So that is where Mao talk about the contribution of principal contradictions and the principal aspects of contradictions. Okay, so the Indian revolutionaries, actually what is the beauty is that, from Marx, Lenin, the kind of revolution we witnessed in China, you see there is a complete departure. But the beauty of Indian Maoist movement is that they claim to be representing both Marxist, Leninist, and the Maoist kind of philosophical tradition. I'll come to the critical aspect of it in a while. Okay, but let's try to understand. Okay, the Maoist presence. This is a very old map that I have given you. Dr. Sudha was mentioning that Manmohan Singh was mentioning that it's the biggest internal security threat. He was completely wrong on this. Okay, because he has never understood, or not many politicians do understand the Maoist. Okay, so the Maoists are never, they were never, and they will never be an internal security threat to the state. They might be a threat to a particular government, but they will never be a threat to the Indian state, because they never talk about the question on the national integrity of Indian state. So far, they have not. Okay, I don't know what will happen in the future, but someone who has been tracking them for last 16, 17 years, I can tell you, they are not going against the state. They are very much against a form of governance. Okay, this is the old map of the Maoist presence in India. So you see, many people would use this word affected in the Maoist affected in India, but I hate to use that terminology, so I call it the Maoist presence in India. They are present in these many areas, not half of the Indian states, but only 10 Indian states where they had presence. Okay, and only, if you see Andhra Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, West Bengal, Bihar, and then Telangana, okay, and some parts of Maharashtra. These are the 4 or 5 states where they had, a critical presence in terms of, the armed personnel, the armed cadres actually fighting against the Indian state or the Indian security forces. So this is the understanding, that this is the presence of the Maoist. From here, let's come to the evolution of the Maoist in India. If you go, so I call it an annihilation phase. Okay, this is popularly also known as Charu Mazumdar's phase. So the Naxalbari uprising, all of you are aware of. So I'll just very quickly go through. One is that Charu Mazumdar's opposition against the United Front government, and the people who do not know about the United Front government, this was also a sort of communist government in West Bengal those days. So that is where the line of struggle became very, very different from the CPI-M and the United Front government. That is where he tried to mobilize the peasants for an armed struggle on the Chinese line. This Chinese line becomes very critical here, because if you remember, by 1967, Mao himself was a big figure, and he was representing the so-called third world countries as a revolutionary figure against all sorts of capitalism, all sorts of kind of an exploitative kind of governance system. So that is where it became a rather a catchy word than following completely Chinese kind of thing. There is also another politics, because China, by that time, we had fought a war in 1962 with China, we had lost it, and that time China was also emerging as an, slowly emerging as an economic and political power in Asia. That is where there was also a kind of vested interest in the Chinese government to highlight Charu Mazumdar as a kind of champion of the deprived people's kind of right and all that. So if you read those days newspaper and the media briefings and all that, the Chinese government had actually instructed all its kind of embassies all over the world to highlight highlight Charu Mazumdar. And the radio Peking, whatever you say, okay, was also relaying a lot of kind of news about Charu Mazumdar. That also gave a kind of hangover to Charu Mazumdar. That is where the Chinese line became very, 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 very important. But if you see the very nature of this struggle, there was nothing Chinese about it. It was very, very localized in nature. People like Jungle Santal, people like Kanu Sanyal, people like Charu Mazumdar, they mobilized the peasants in Darjeeling district, that is in Naxalbari village, where the local conditions against the jotedars, against the jamindars, okay, that became a principal contradictions, okay, the relationship between the peasants and the jotedar. The idea was that the people who are tilling the land, people who are actually working on the field should have the land right, should also get the kind of product they deserve, or they have the kind of entitlement over. So this is where the Chinese line become very, very, very critical, very, very political in thing. That is just a conscious decision by the Naxals those days. I don't call them Naxals anymore. I call them Maoists. To use the Chinese line so that they will get some kind of logistic and ideological support from China, and secondly, to internationalize something that was local, so that you will get a lot of international attention, which it very successfully got, and Charu Mazumdar became a revolutionary hero. So then, what were the main objectives of this movement? And the main objective was to establish authority of peasants in the village committees. You see, many people, they see that the communism as an antithesis to democracy. This is what we as political scientists, we always study, and we tend to believe in this thing. But, with some kind of, reasoning, if you try to understand, I always go back to Marx's very famous kind of thing: development of each is development of all. So that has a kind of democratic kind of connotation there. So that is where you see the establishment of authority of peasants in the village committees. This gives a very, very democratic kind of sense here. And the armed against the reactionary jotedars, you see the terminology being used. This is reactionary in the sense that people who do not subscribe, people who do not subscribe the kind of the equality and the equity for the people, they are termed as kind of reactionary here. And the smash, the monopoly of the jotedars are basically the landlords. Okay, then what is very important is that ownership and distribution of land, where this is a very clear-cut departure of Charu Mazumdar from Mao. Okay, this is not centralized. The resource or the source of the source of production is not centralized with a community or with an organization. This is where you capture or reclaim the land from the jotedars, jamindars, and all that, and then you distribute the land to the peasants. Okay, but then this is where very critical departure from Mao one has to remember. But then what was important is that the connection that we find, that annihilation of class enemy through armed struggle. Now this becomes a catchy phrase, and most of us actually will pick it up. Similarly, Professor Christopher was mentioning that during this Gandhi Jayanti and all that, we're discussing Mao. It becomes even more important, even more critically important, though, to discuss the Maoist thing. Okay, during 151 years of Gandhi's birth anniversary, because Gandhi, when we are talking about Gandhi, the most important thing that comes to our mind is non-violence. When we are talking about Maoism, the most important thing that comes to our mind is about violence. But beyond this violence and non-violence kind of mediatory, there is a strong kind of socio-political process that needs to be understood, and Gandhi becomes critical how to deal with this thing. So coming back to the annihilation of class enemy through armed struggles, you'll find that this becomes a catchy phrase. That is where people start linking Charu Mazumdar and saying that this was a Chinese ploy, that was the attempt was made to reduce the people's kind of struggle to get their entitlement and their rights. So this is some statistics that 90% of the villages are mobilized, and if you go by the report, some 180 cases of people are killed. The annihilation of line, if you put it in a theoretical framework, the idea was to destroy all forms of feudalism and replace them with supreme authorities of the peasants. Then the annihilation of class enemy as the highest form of struggle. And this is again another annihilation of class enemy as the highest form of struggle. This is where Charu Mazumdar was actually pitching to get recognized internationally. Okay, then to create legitimate ground for use of violence. This is very, very critical. If you see, read Manoranjan Mahanti kind of people, the scholars, by that time, by 1970s, 80s, people started using this phrase as revolutionary violence. Revolutionary violence, that means violence for a cause. So that is where you assign some sort of legitimacy to the violence. That is where a lot of literature was actually created to put it in a legitimate kind of bracket. That the violence is not for nothing. The violence is against the exploitators. Okay, so that is why the red terror against the white terror. The red terror, and I put them in the column, the red terror was, of course, by the Naxalites against the white terror. The white terror is by the reactionary state and the reactionary kind of, jotedars, jamindars, and all that. That is where the idea was to peasants to overcome their fear, because they are very much fearful of the jotedars and the jamindars against the feudal forces and join armed movement. And what is even more critical here was the creation of a liberated zone for the success of annihilation. Okay, that is complete elimination of the class enemy. Okay, so then I read out in Liberation 1967, Charu Mazumdar himself wrote, once an area is liberated from the clutches of the class enemies, the repressive state is deprived of its ears and eyes, making it impossible for the police to know who is guerrilla and who is not, and who is stealing his own land and who steals that of the jotedar. That is where, to create a kind of condition where people own the mode of production, the relation of production in the Marxist term becomes completely blurred. Okay, and you create a kind of liberation zone. And with this kind of theoretical framework, why Charu Mazumdar became very popular, because before him, 1948, if I go back to the Northern Telangana communist movement and the Tibaga movement and all that, these are the pre-organizational phases of Maoist movement in India. You will see that nobody actually, articulated the theory or the concepts of, revolution the way Charu Mazumdar did, and this is how he became very, very popular, and he became a major reference point for the subsequent kind of uprisings. So one of these uprising was Srikakulam Uprising in the coastal Andhra. So this was the Girijan struggle. I was mentioning you about 1948, the northern Telangana, and after that it actually had the spread to the Parvatipuram agencies in Srikakulam. This predates the Naxalbari, but then once this movement was, the Naxalbari movement was getting momentum, this also again reorganized, and they also started a kind of an uprising. I call it a uprising because it didn't start, it actually didn't last for a longer time. So this had a spillover effect from the Koraput and the Ganjam districts in Odisha. The fight was against basically the Sahukars. Sahukars could be one particular class. You can club them under money lenders, big businessmen and all these people. Okay, so the fight was against the Sahukars, landowners and the forest officers. If you go back to the Naxalbari, the people who are revolting were necessarily the peasants. Here, if you come, you will find it is a completely wonderful combination of the peasants and the tribals against the Sahukars, landowners and the forest officers. Okay, so this became so wonderful. The movement becomes so kind of it's a highlight point. The Charu Mazumdar visited this place, and he declared that Srikakulam would become the Yannan of India. Okay, from where the ideas of Naxalite revolutionary ideas would spread to the other states. Okay, but the problem is that this is the kind of Srikakulam uprising where there is a major difference of ideas actually took place between Subbarao Panigrai, one of the school teachers who was actually leading the movement, that how to on the annihilation kind of line, that the manufacturing a class enemy that Charu Mazumdar was stressing upon was contested by somebody like Subbarao Panigrai, that you cannot have indiscriminate kind of killing in the name of revolution. But this movement came to a standstill with the death of V. Satyanarayana, and Nagabhushan Patnaik was arrested after that. This movement also. But this is a very interesting movement that we don't talk about much in the mainstream kind of literature. This is the Musahari Uprising. Musahari Uprising in 1968. Musahari is a place in Bihar. Musa means rats. The rat eaters. This is one of the castes that is termed as the Mahadalit in this context now. This was led by Satyanarayan Singh. Okay, this is very interesting. Dr. Freddy, if you are mentioning other day about the caste line and all this, this thing is very, very interesting. Can you think of an issue of cutting trees and the ownership of land that leads to a Maoist kind of revolution? These are some of the important kind of narratives that the mainstream understanding on Maoist and the Maoist struggle actually do not highlight. So this was the first kind of uprising that adopted the guerrilla method. Okay, and they started seizing food grain. This was very, very important because you could see that the Musahari, the name comes like people who eat the rats. They, of course, they didn't have access to the food grains. Okay, so they started seizing food grain, reclaiming land, and they, like, you know, destroying government records. What was the intention behind destroying government records? But the record actually carried who are the so-called legal owners of the land. You know, once you destroy these records, the reclaiming land belongs to the people who are actually revolting. Here, this is a wonderful combination of the class and the caste, the economic class and the caste coming together, fighting against all sorts of kind of, you know, exploitations. By 1969, you know, it had actually spread to some of the important districts of Bihar, starting from Darbhanga to Champaran to South Manegra, Purulia, West Bengal. Okay, so if you see the okay, as this was also going to spread to the Bhojpur areas in, you know, UP Bihar border, UP Bihar corridor, you know, this also mobilized on the caste lines. You know, you see the caste, the Kurmis, the Queries, and the Yadavs. So first two are the SCs and the second are the OBC. So these are of course the marginalized caste in the, you know, Bhojpur area. So this is a unique case where the caste was blended with peasantry. You know, this is where you will see that the Maoist claim that they represent both the peasants, both the tribals, and the marginalized caste. And this we witness in the Bhojpur area, and didn't distinguish between the rich and the upper caste. Okay, so the upper caste and the rich were actually clubbed together. This is a wonderful contribution of Mao. If you go to the class is necessarily an ideological thing. So the class, if at all, you have to divide in two parts in Maoist understanding. It is people who are for the revolution and people who are against the revolution. That is where the rich, even if coming from a lower caste, will be targeted, okay, by the people who are fighting against them. Okay, so no distinguishing between the rich and the upper caste. But this uprising also ended with the death of Jagadish Mahato. But this, if you try to find out some of the revolutionary songs in YouTube, you'll see that the Bhojpur area of UP and Bihar, the number of revolutionary songs they actually created, and each of these songs was so popular. Okay, this actually carries a lot of good narratives about the social structure, the social kind of interactions, and the position of the Dalits, position of the marginalized caste in the social structure. This becomes very important as a reference point. Then coming to the Debra-Gopiballavpur Uprising. Okay, this was led by Bahadur Mandal and Asim Chatterjee. Asim Chatterjee is popularly known as Kaka. Okay, didn't have any clarity on contradictions. This was, one can put it in a very cultural kind of thing. Okay, didn't favor land distribution. They said, okay, there's a centralized kind of thing should be there. Advocated political supremacy by the peasant. Okay, this is something, Asim Chatterjee had a kind of disagreement with Charu Mazumdar. He's talking about that the political authority needs to be captured by the peasants. Okay, but the annihilation line followed was more theoretical, okay, line of Mao. They're talking, it's not necessarily you'll have to kill them, eliminate them, but you'll have to make them completely powerless. Annihilate them, replace them with the mass activities and the peasants coming and capturing the political power. And this is how Asim Chatterjee became a vocal, very, very vocal against Charu Mazumdar. And there was another thing that Lakshmipur Khedi that was led by Shiv Kumar Mishra. This uprising fought on the peasantry issues, didn't have much success. Okay, these are, this is the kind of, annihilation kind of page. That what is important here is, if you see, except Jungle Santal and Kanu Sanyal, Jungle Santal, for all these kind of, movements, you will find the leadership was with the upper caste, but they are representing and they're fighting for the lower caste, the tribals, the landless, and the other marginalized caste. So what was the outcome of the Charu Mazumdar phase, or this thing? The Charu Mazumdar emerged as undisputed leader of the Charuism as a principle. the annihilation line overshadowed the politico-ideological line. Mass organization, United Front took a backseat. Okay, diverted from the localized conditions. What happened that peoples from Kolkata, those who were guided by the romantic ideas of revolution, they came in hundreds in number to places like Srikakulam, and there was instances of indiscriminate killing of the rich in the name of class enemy. Okay, that is where the localized condition was completely diverted. Okay, so that is how people started calling them as the urban thugs. Okay, so then what was very critical here, as Charu Mazumdar was getting attention of the Chinese, the Indian realities were started seen through the Chinese experience. Okay, the slogans like Comrade Mao is our comrade. Okay, Chairman Mao is our comrade kind of thing. And that is how the Srikakulam was compared to kind of NN. Okay, the educational institutions of Kolkata. Okay, they are seen through the romanticizing the Chinese experience and all that. Okay, so everything in India would stand or fall according to its relevance to the Chinese experience. This is where you will see that led to a kind of factionalism in the Indian Maoist thing. So you have oppositions from Nagiredi, that is in the United Andhra Pradesh, then SN Singh, Satyanarayan Singh from Bihar, and Asim Chatterjee in Odisha Bengal border. So this led to, as I told you, the emergence of factionalism. This period was critical because of two factors. One, the drastic change in the political decision making in India. This is the time when you had a very strong personality like Mrs. Gandhi, okay, who was leading from the front. Okay, very one party kind of dominance in Indian democracy, and the political decision making was very authoritative in nature. And attempts made to divert from the Chinese line. This is where some people also tilted towards the Soviet line. So CPI-ML, which basically the Marxist-Leninist was put to test during the emergency. This is where how this the movement would actually consolidate, how this movement will actually phase out was tested during the emergency. So this is where very important aspect happened, that Satyanarayan Singh called for renouncing the Chinese as well as the Charu Mazumdar foregrounds. Okay, that the Chinese or the Maoist line cannot be replicated in India because they do not solve the Indian realities. Okay, he had four important kind of reasons to actually back up. That the communists didn't enjoy popular support because of their limited role during the freedom struggle. Now this is purely a Congress ploy to delegitimize the communists, saying that okay, they had absolutely no role to play during the freedom struggle. So okay, they do not enjoy any popular support, which was not completely true. Okay, and in India, you have a strong parliamentary system. Okay, you cannot enter into the urban area because the urban area, the governance mechanism is very strong. The parliamentary system of democracy has been well accepted. Okay, and the third, that how do you formulate a class, okay, revolutionary class to fight against the parliamentary system? Because India is a place, okay, there is some element of critical truth here, that it is a place of multiple nationalities. Though there is a manufactured artificial nationalism called Indian, this thing, but this is a country of multiple nationalities. To bring them under, okay, the brandfold of a one revolutionary idea will be very, very difficult. Okay, the fourth one, from the economic point of view, from the development point of view, that industries in India were far more developed than China. Okay, that is where that the so-called peasantry revolution, the so-called cultural revolution may not hold ground, because we have developed by 1975-76. Indian 5-year plans and the industrial development was way ahead of China those days. Okay, this is where Jayaprakash Narayan also played a very, very important role. I know many people would also blame that Satyanarayan Singh, because he was a Thakur Rajput from Bihar. He listened to kind of JP, and he thought a kind of a parliamentary democratic role or a road should be suitable. suitable for bringing certain changes in India, which will take care of the grievances of the marginalized people. This is where the JP movement, as a kind of challenge to Mrs. Gandhi or Congress. That is where SN Singh didn't support the Congress but came with JP, and this was seen as an opportunism that Satyanarayan Singh wanted to be seen as a bigger leader. Okay, this is where he also came in touch with Charan Singh. I'll not get into this thing. Okay, but this is where Satyanarayan Singh was actually accused of playing a higher caste kind of an angle to dilute all the kind of fruits of the revolution that they have gained so far. This got this actually invited a strong kind of opposition from Kanu Sanyal, Asim Chatterjee, Nagi Reddy, on the caste line again. Okay. Okay, when this is the thing that by 1980, if you see, there emerged two important factions in the Indian Maoist kind of movement. One was the People's War Group and the Maoist Communist Center of Bihar. The PWG actually operated in United Andhra Pradesh, parts of Karnataka, and substantial parts, actually the southern and southern western part of Odisha. And it also had some kind of a substantial presence in Chhattisgarh and parts of Jharkhand. Okay, but then when MCCI actually controlled the entire Bihar, the Jungle Mahal areas of West Bengal. So from the PWG side, Kondapalli Sitaramaya emerged as a very strong leader, and the kind of violence they resorted to was unbelievable. Okay. The PWG and the MCCI, if you bring some kind of, try to find out some kind of commonality here, that the contradiction related to land, agriculture, and the tribal issues. Okay. This covered AP, parts of Odisha, Bihar, and Maharashtra. Okay. The formation of MCCI under Pramod Mishra and Sanjay Dusad, again, two personalities from the higher caste. Okay. Fought against the caste and agrarian contradictions. Okay, then had a presence in Bihar, West Bengal, and some parts of Odisha. So this is a critical thing that in 2000, when Jharkhand was formed, that led to a strong, violent, factional kind of fighting between the MCC and the PWG. Okay, this is also important to mention that when these two are the important and very dominant kind of Maoist forces, there are also many smaller kind of organizations belonging to the same kind of a little bit deviation here and there to the Maoist kind of ideology. Okay, so when the Bihar state was split and the Jharkhand was formed, there was a very nasty kind of factional fighting between the MCC and the PWG, which led to the intellectual thinkers of this group coming together and trying to merge them. And by that time, the socio-political conditions of India has actually changed. In 2004, if you remember, okay, the NDA 1 was out of power and UPA 1 had just come into power. Okay, they thought that this is a wonderful kind of time where both the groups should come together and merge and fight the reactionary semi-colonial and semi-feudal kind of Indian state together. I'll take 5-10 minutes more. Is that fine? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. You may, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes,
10
sir. Yes,
minutes.
sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, just 10 minutes. Okay. So this is why in September 2004, the MCC and the PWG came together and formed the CPI, Communist Party of India Maoist. Okay, so this is a critical movement, and if you see that in South Asia, we are also witnessing during the same time, starting from 1996 till 2006, there was a very, very brutally bloody kind of Maoist movement in the state of Nepal. Yeah, you will also be appreciate to know that the Indian Maoist played a very major role in establishing especially the MCCI and some of the PWG kind of leaders in establishing the Maoist thing in Nepal and guiding them throughout, throughout to fight the monarchy and the anti-democratic kind of regimes there. So then by 2004, if you see that the Nepal Maoist thing was coming down in terms of its losing, and there was some kind of, the movement or kind of development to go for a peace talk and all that. Okay, but at the same time in 2004, we are seeing that it's a watershed movement in the Indian Maoist movement, Indian Maoism, where both the parties, they came together and they formed this political, and that is where they moved from a pre-organizational phase to a organizational one. Now, for the first time, you have a proper organization, guided by the Marxist-Leninist and Maoist principles. Okay, it borrowed heavily from the 1969 document of Charu Mazumdar. What should be the organization look like? It should have a central military commission, it should have a central committee, a number of mass organizations. This becomes very, very critical. What is number of mass organization would necessarily bring all sorts of people, those who are against the so-called repressive Indian state together, and they will form a revolutionary front to fight the state, to fight the government or the parliamentary form of governance. Okay, so right now this is statistics. Okay, let's not get into this. This has come down drastically. So by 2000, this is by 2010-11, it is spread over 183 districts in 11 states, and some parts of Bastar, some parts of Bijapur, parts of Kalimela in Malkanagiri, parts of Jungle Mahal, Gadchiroli. They had the liberated zones. Liberated zones in the sense that they had full control over the socio-political and economic lives of the people there. Okay. So if you get into the conceptual framework or the theoretical contributions of the Indian Maoists to the theories of revolution, they identify four major contradictions. Okay, the first one, the contradiction between imperialism and Indian people, that even if they call it a semi-colonial narrative, that even if Indian state is free from the colonial rule, but the imperialism is very much there. The contradiction between feudalism and the broad masses of the people, between the capital and the labor, contradiction among the ruling classes. Okay, so I don't have time to explain all these things. If there is a question, I'll explain. But the fourth point is that, as Mao said, within capitalism, there is a lot of contradiction. They are also talking about within the ruling class, you have multiple contradictions. Okay, but with all these things, as I mentioned Mao also talked about the principality of contradiction. Okay, that is where Mao is identifying that contradiction between feudalism and masses, that the land is not being properly distributed. There are a lot of people living as landless. Okay, and the mass, they call it as a landless mass. Okay, their relationship with feudalism is the principal contradiction, and that is how the land became the principal issue to fight. Okay, to fight or to carry forward a kind of revolutionary movement. Okay, so then as the land became this thing, the mass organizations like the Chasi Mulia Adivasi Sangh, okay, they become critical. There are many, there is Kuilabang Sangha, there is Chasi Mulia Sangh, you name it, starting from Andhra Pradesh to Odisha to Chhattisgarh to Jharkhand. Numerous kind of local mass organizations actually came up and they joined the movement. Okay, and that is where they found that this is a brand umbrella under which they came and fought for their rights. And if you see the one contribution of Indian Maoism, that the way they blend the tribal issue of land with the agriculturalization of land. The tribal issue of land is all about the identity, where it's not only related to the economy of the tribal, but it is also related to the cultural and the social identity of the tribal. That is where you link the land of the tribal issue, socio-economic, cultural identity of the tribal, to the agriculturalization of land. Which is the lower caste people would actually need land, not for that socio-cultural identity, but for economic kind of thing. So then, another important contribution, if you see, is the land distribution to the group ownership of land. That is where you see that the land, distribution, what the legal state would believe, that now they are saying the group should own up the land in the name of community farming. So that is where you see the annihilation line of eliminating the class enemy, Asim Chakravarti's line. If you remember the cultural aspect, now that is where in Bandhugaon and Narayanpatna area in Korapur district of Odisha, you will see the people, the Chasimulia Adivasi Sangh, with the help of the Maoist, they would grab and reclaim the land and distribute among the tribals, among the landless, scheduled caste and all that. Okay, this is where the class enemy is annihilated. They have been, their right over the land has been completely taken out. Okay, and the control over the forest products in the liberated zones to deal with the tribal issues. Okay, these are some of them. Then comes the important aspect. These days the narrative is that everybody is called as an urban Naxal, urban Maoist. This is where the urban movement is a reality in the Maoist kind of objective. But to call someone urban Naxal, how far that is true, that is demands a separate kind of discussion. I will discuss that. Now this is where they also wanted to link with the working class to bring them to the revolution. The Safai Karmacharis, the people who are working in the factories. Okay, now they have a solid base in the rural India, in the tribal India. Now they want to have a presence, or the ideological presence at least, in the urban centers. Okay, this is where move to urban areas while having base in the rural signifies their adoption of both Leninist and the Maoist line. Okay, so this is where the tactically united front, for its urban perspective plan, it was actually created. Tactical United Front means people who are having the same kind of issues should come together, form a front, and fight for their rights. Okay, so and this many people will claim that the Tactical United Front actually serves a good cover against the state, because the ideas or the issues are very genuine. But at the same time, this gives a kind of cover to further the Maoist kind of objectives in the urban areas. On the armed struggle and violence, okay, this has been debated, this has been contested time and again. Why would the Maoist actually resort to violence? This is where, as I told you, giving a legitimacy to the violent kind of thing. This is where they find that to overthrow a parliamentary form of government and to establish a new democracy, that's the objective of the Maoists, the armed struggle becomes the principal task. Okay, and you can only overthrow this reactionary state or the reactionary kind of government through an armed struggle. That is where violence becomes very important factor. Okay, and this protracted people's war, to fight till you gain your objective or come to your objective becomes the this is an idea that they borrowed from Mao, and as Mao suggested, they follow the three states of a protracted people's war. One is the strategic defense, where you cannot fight the mighty state, but you have to be little defensive about your own existence. Then strategic equilibrium and strategic offense. But I would say that the Indian Maoist would never have the strategic equilibrium and offense, because Indian state is very, very powerful to that matter. Okay, but then if you see the Maoist activity over the years, you'll see that this legitimate or the revolutionary idea of violence has deviated from its line a bit, to the extent that we have witnessed that the Maoists, in the name of revolution, are actually killing the innocent villagers. The killing of the people who are traveling in Gyaneshwari Express in 2010 in the name of revolution, where they killed 250 odd people, and the killing of this Hindu Vishwa Hindu Parishad Gary Lakshmanananda Saraswati. Okay, so that is where of all this indiscriminate killing of the people in the name of revolution, that has given them the kind of reputation that the violence and the Maoists are interchangeably used. Okay, but I would still suggest that there is a lot, okay, beyond the violent aspect of the Maoists. Okay, let me come to the conclusion very quickly, that the Maoist movement in India can be seen to have moved from Marxist-Leninist and Maoist lines substantially, because it is not only these ideas they have actually borrowed, they have also tried to aid the local specificities in actually carrying out a particular revolution or a movement. It functions according to localized conditions and specificities. Can you think of gender as an issue in any of the Maoist movement in elsewhere, okay, in the world? The anti-Iraq movement, Kundagiri Paidama as a leader, fighting for women's right, or the tribal rights in tribal Odisha. That is where you see that issues like the tribal, the Dalit, the landlessness. Okay, then we're talking about the women right. Okay, all those things have come at the localized conditions, which has legitimized or which have contributed to the legitimacy of the movement. Okay. Though, but at the same time, they have not completely, departed from the Marxist-Leninist and Maoist line, where they function as a highly centralized, organized structure. Okay, okay, but at the same time, you could see there is also a lot of factionalism now in the Maoist. Okay, in Chhattisgarh, in Jharkhand itself, you have 3 to 4 Maoists actually functioning. One is Revolutionary People's Front of India, you have Revolutionary People's Front, you have CPI-Maoist, you have the Tritiya Prastuti Committee. But what is important is that the Maoists who are trying to bring about to form a revolutionary class is also divided on the caste line, where the Yadav brothers are actually leading the RPF. There is another caste, the Sidil caste is leading PLFI. Okay, similarly the Nagiridi faction. And you have a ample number of examples where the Maoists are actually divided on the caste lines. But at the same time, even though they are divided on the caste lines, okay, they continue to garner support, if not to fight or take up the arm against the Indian state, but to have some kind of what do you say, the ideological support for the cause. Okay, but at the same time, whether people call it is an anti-state, anti-security threat to India, genuinely there is a lot of genuine grievances of the people that get reflected through the Maoists. I'm not actually subscribing the violent way of protesting, but at the same time, if I can put it this way, arguably it remains as the most powerful political force fighting for the peasants and the tribal rights. Okay, so far, all this tribal, the peasants movement, when the Farm Bill and all this came, no Farm Bill or no peasants movement has actually impacted upon the government the way the Maoists have done so far, even for the tribal rights. Okay, so I stop here. Thank you for giving me this chance. I'll be able to take few questions if you have some questions, and please be brutal because your comments will only enrich my understanding. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful lecture. Now the floor is open for questions. Please make sure that you unmute yourself before putting forth the question, and you can make use of the chat box as well to ask your questions.
Either I have spoken very well or nobody understood me.
Sir,
yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Sir, we have a question in the chat box from V Rajeshwari. Sir,
Okay.
What are the steps taken by the government and for tackling Maoism? Does it come under state or central jurisdiction? Is there any possibility to negotiate with them and we can fulfill some of their interests?
Yeah, okay, this is a very interesting question. Okay, the government has taken multiple steps to to tackle, if I can use this word, tackle Maoism in India. Okay, one of the steps, there is a twin approach that actually ruled for a long time till the Modi government came in 2015. The twin was security and development, that you handle the Maoist with a strong security kind of counter-violence measure, where you actually bring down or de-escalate the violent incidents. And the second, that the Planning Commission actually gave a report in 2008, where it says the development in the extremist affected areas. So it was argued that because of underdevelopment, people have actually taken to arms. Okay, so now you have the government has brought some development measures in the Maoist present areas, okay, to wean the people away from the Maoist. These are, apart from this, we have surrender and rehabilitation policy. Okay, and in 2015, the Modi government came up with something very, very novel, but how far they have been successful, I do not know, that ensuring the rights and entitlements of the local communities, basically giving their land back to them. Okay, which the Maoists are claiming to be representing. Okay, so these are the government positions. How far they have succeeded? Okay, this remains a question. Okay, they have not succeeded enough. Okay, I can tell you that. Second, is there a room for negotiation? There is always a room for negotiation. Okay, I'll share my writings on negotiation 2003 for the United Andhra Pradesh under Chandrababu Naidu. Actually, they made an attempt to talk to the PWG, but that actually failed. For the reason that both the parties actually were not guided by any principles. Both the parties were engaged with a lot of kind of vested interest to actually further their interest. So that is how it actually failed. Both the Maoists, the PWG, and the state sort of failed it. Okay. So, but then increasingly now we are all writing to the government to engage with a kind of negotiation with the Maoists. But for obvious reason that a good conflict creates a lot of lootable resources. Yeah. So once there is a scope for a lot of lootable resources, you know how the political elites, including the Maoist political elites, also behave. Okay, there is obvious reason why people are not going for negotiations, because this remains as a very, very important resource which actually being politicized and gives a lot of opportunism to a lot of people. Okay, but then negotiation is the key because this will not come down through a counter-violence. Thank you.
Dr. Anshuman, I have a question.
Please.
When you were saying about these movements, where do you locate these movements? Whether do you locate them as insurgent movements or extremist or separatist movements? Looking at it, I don't think that these are insurgent movements, because when you stated that there is no form of internal security, integrity, the threats to integrity of the state, I do not see that there's a kind of insurgency or a kind of separatist movement that is seen with these Maoist movements. So when we look at that from that angle, where do you locate them? Are they, if they are extremists, what is their agenda? What is it that they want to achieve through their violent activities that they are engaging in? Yeah, that's the question, if you can explain to us.
Yeah, this is a very, very, very important thing, because a lot of mediatory is happening in all over the world. We interchangeably use terminologies. Extremist, separatist, insurgents, terrorists. All those things are actually interchangeably used. Okay, I'll tell you. When I was writing my PhD dissertation, the PhD dissertation was on the insurgency movements in South Asia. The most difficult thing was to define insurgency. Okay, at the outset, let me tell you that the Maoist movement in India is an insurgency, because insurgents are not separatists. Yeah, insurgents are only aiming. Okay, what is the definition of insurgency? If I can borrow, starting from David Golula in 1960s to Baduonili to my thesis. that it is a consciously planned political, violent political movement where the non-ruling actually elements want to replace the ruling elite. Okay, through violence. Okay, this is exactly what the Maoists want. They want a new democratic form of governance. Okay, in the place of a parliamentary democracy in India. Okay, they do not have any belief in the parliamentary democracy. Okay, this is the stated objective. Okay, to establish new democracy in India. Okay, what is new democracy? That's a separate thing we will discuss. They, ever in their this thing, they have never questioned the integrity of Indian state. Okay, that is where you cannot bracket them under separatist. Okay, they do not want a new territory, a separate territory. Okay, they are saying that Indian state as it is remains the same, but the governance system will be changed. Okay, we want a change in the governance system. Okay, that is where they are not separatist. They are very much an insurgent group. Okay, where violence part is very much there, but you cannot call them terrorists. Okay, because they do not come under the strict definition of terrorism for the simple reason is that who the target, is very much spelled out. Is the state or the government machineries. Okay, and people who are seen as a class enemy, those who go against their revolutionary ideas, they are they are not, terrorized in the name of the bomb blast and all this. The only incident that I remember in 2010 was Ganeshwari Express. Now, this was not done by the Maoist, but a front organization of the Maoist. It's called the People's Committee Against Police Atrocity, PCPA. Okay, but then after that incident happened, they have written dozens of apology letter that we disown them, and after that you will see the Maoists have absolutely no connection with PCPA. When I'm saying all this, don't misunderstand me that I am subscribing any of these Maoist ideologies, but I am just reading as a political scientist, what it is. So that this is basically an insurgent group. Okay, fighting to completely, drastically change the governance system.
Sir?
Yeah.
So may I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
So, sir, so Mao's doctrine, he says that political power goes from barrel of a gun. So it has a very strong undercurrents of violence in it. So how do you think this has played out, especially within the Indian scenario? And how relevant do you think it is today, this doctrine?
Yeah. See, if you see the socio-political conditions of China those days, for Mao to make that kind of statement makes a lot of sense depending on the Chinese condition. Okay, but coming to the Indian thing, I don't think this is a very relevant kind of statement to deal with. Okay, because even if you believe in that ultimate violence to gain your stated objective, this will never be fulfilled because unlike the Chinese state those days, Indian state is well consolidated. It's a well accepted democracy. You might find a lot of lacuna, a lot of drawbacks, a lot of limitations with this thing, but it's a strong state where the popular legitimacy is with a democratic kind of thing. So I don't think, okay, of course it is a very strong statement for Mao to make, but maybe that situation in China those days actually demanded that. Okay, but the problem with it is a lot of this media and the security people who deal with security as from the state-centric point of view, they always quote this kind of thing to delegitimize. Okay, a lot of other good kind of issues that the Maoists actually represent and or actually bring in, and the grievances of the people. This is just one thing, and they do not support. I don't think if you read some of these Telugu writings by Barbara Rao, by Gadar, and all these people, violence has been accepted with some limits. That is where Subbarao Panigrahi will disagree with Charu Mazumdar. He's saying you cannot manufacture a class enemy for the sake of it. Okay, you cannot go for indiscriminate killing. Okay, the limits of violence actually been contested. Okay, very, critical manner in India. So this barrel of gone and all those things do not actually hold anything in Indian context. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, we have another question in the chat box from B.
Please.
Pavishya. Sir, apart from the Charu Mazumdar phase, when exactly can we trace the proliferation of Maoists in India?
Okay, this is basically after 2004, after after the merger of PWG and the MCCI, the Maoist Communist Center of India, and the PWG came together, as I told you, in 2004 to form the CPI-Maoist. The reason was by 2000 from 2000 to 2004 September. Okay, the factional fighting, the factional violent fighting between the PWG and the MCC was so strong that the government actually took them very lightly, that they will kill each other and they will completely eliminate, and they will perish. Okay, but once they came together, the forces came together, and then if you see the violence chart in 2004 to 2010, this is the escalated period of Maoist violence, that the state had absolutely no clue how to deal with it, because both the forces came together, and now they are carrying out their kind of violent activities. That is where I would say after Charu Mazumdar, okay, 2004 to 2010, okay, where the period where the Maoist incident or the Maoist activities actually escalated.
Thank you, sir, for patiently answering all the questions, and thank you all for your active participation. Now, I invite Ami from 2nd BA to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, all. I would like to start by thanking God Almighty for providing us with this wonderful opportunity to gain knowledge amidst this ongoing pandemic. Also, on behalf of the Association of Political Science, I would like to express a heartfelt gratitude to the speaker of the day, Dr. Anshuman Behera, for sharing with us today his findings, insights, and knowledge on the topic From Mao to Maoism, the Indian Path. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the members of the Association of Political Science for attending this lecture and being supportive and cooperative throughout this event. Thank you all.